We will call the Caroline County Board of Supervisors meeting to order. Let the record state that all board members are present. We have Mr. Black representing the Western Caroline District, Mr. Seeley representing Bowling Green, Mr. Underwood representing Reedy Church, Mr. Akers representing Madison, Mr. Taylor representing Port Royal, and I'm Floyd Thomas representing the Mattapan District. I've asked Mr. Rogers, your sons' names are?
Grayson and Carson.
Grayson and Carson. I've asked Grayson and Carson if they would help lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance after Mr. Akers gives us the invocation. Mr. Akers?
Thank you. Would you please stand? Our gracious and Heavenly Father, as we come together this evening as a board, we ask for your guidance and we ask for your understanding and we ask for your wisdom. We ask for your guidance that we will make the decisions that are pleasing in your sight and what is best for the people of this county. We ask that you'll help us to put ourselves aside and only look at what is best for the county and its residents. We thank you for the blessings that you bestowed upon us as a people, and we thank you for your love and your kindness. And we pray that you'll continue to bless the people that serve us, the police department, the fire and rescue, the military. We just ask that you'll bless them and keep your protective hand upon them at all times. We thank you and we make this prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Grayson and Carson, if you will just step to the podium, please, because you guys are what we do all our work for. So we're ready when you are.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen, and I know that was really painful, wasn't it? So we need something good. Roll Tide. All right. First order of business would be board amendments to the agenda. Mr. Cully?
Yes, we have one item we'd like to place on consent would be the cancer. I think it's the Cancer Society holiday tree. It's been on the courthouse grounds for a number of years. We got a request. American Heart Association. A number of years. We just got the request this week.
Mr. Parton sent that to me yesterday, and I said we ought to be able to do that on consent. That's nothing new. We've done it in the past for years. Basically, we give permission. The judge has given us permission already. So we'll make that if there's no problem. Consent agenda G.
Yeah.
I'll have F as the purchase of the chiller. Oh, you took the chiller off? Oh, I've got the draft. Okay. So F is gone already. So we'll make that agenda item 2F then. That should be easy enough. Okay. Is there a motion to that effect?
Mr. Chairman, can I add something to the old business to amend the agenda?
Sure.
Last meeting we had discussed, and Mr. Cully said he was going to come back to us in regards to the YMCA. The YMCA board, one per magisterial district. We had discussed that last time, and you said you were going to get back to us on it. So I'd like to continue that discussion about the local YMCA board.
Okay. Do we have an old business? Unfinished business. Unfinished ends at 5. We'll make it 5A. Okay. Motion to the effect of adding Y board and the American Heart Association tree under consent. Is in order?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Seeley and seconded by Mr. Black. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion carries. Now we get to opening board comments. Mr. Black?
Yeah, I just have a couple. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend the 38th Parallel Project because of work. But from everything I read in the newspapers and so forth and the people that I talked to, it was quite the experience for those people that were there. So I'd like to thank all those who were involved in that. Same thing goes with the Bowling Green Elementary ribbon cutting that occurred last Friday. And finally, I'd like to congratulate the Caroline County school system on their success in their bond referendum. I think an 81% victory says a lot to us and a lot to the people in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Mr. Seeley?
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to thank everybody who attended the veteran ceremony on the courthouse lawn on Monday. It was probably one of the biggest ones. We had almost 100 people. It was a great event.
Mr. Underwood?
I just want, Mr. Chairman, I want to kind of echo Mr. Black's sentiment. You know, it's in the times of economic strife, it's very difficult for people to step up to the plate and want to spend money on our schools and allow us to raise their taxes to pay for that. So we up here sometimes are at odds about whether we should raise taxes, whether we shouldn't raise taxes. But for the people to step up to the plate and support the schools, I think it certainly takes a little bit of burden off of us, and on the other hand, certainly gives us some direction as to what we should do and how we should continue to move the county forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Akers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things. Number one, the school renovation. It was a great ceremony on Friday. I think it was Friday. You, of course, spoke, and for the board, I was pleasantly pleased as to the results of what has happened there, and I'm happy that it has been completed. As far as the bond referendum, you know, I think there's no question it was a mandate to this board. It's not just a suggestion. It is a mandate to this board as to, you know, if you're going to talk the talk, you need to walk the walk. When you talk about supporting something, then you need to come up with ways to pay for it. And I think the people in this county have said to this board, we expect for you to raise taxes in order to pay for this this project. And I, for one, am going to take that lead, and I'm going to commit to that in the next budget year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Taylor?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of things. I had an opportunity, along with Mr. Akers and Mr. Thomas, to attend the VACO meeting this past week, and I won't go into all of what was dealt with. Just time won't permit us to do that, but I do serve on the education board. We did meet, and we talked about issues that we feel are going to be beneficial to the county. We talked about the local government's contribution to VRS and some of the things that we might be able to do to get the General Assembly to take some action in that light. There was concern about teachers being certified in CPR and the legal ramifications that go with that. And they talked about dual enrollment in the schools and how we can work with the community college programs. So there were just a number of very good things that are going to the General Assembly. And certainly if anyone has a question or would like more detail, I will be glad to do that, although I won't take time during opening board comments to do that. But just want you to be aware of some of the things that were talked about at the conference and how valuable I feel that the conference really is. In addition to that, I would also like to pay respect to the family of the judge, Peyton Farmer, who passed away. I think that he was someone who has made a grave contribution in this community, and I just feel like we should give our respects in that regard. I don't know if you were going to do that, Mr. Chairman, but
Well, that's okay.
okay. That's all that I have.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I have quite a few since we haven't been around. They're little repeats, but I want to make sure I got them. We did a ribbon cutting for 7-Eleven. Mr. Black and Mr. Seeley were there. That was a while back. The McDonald's at Ladysmith has finally opened, I think, since our last meeting, which is great. And we're scheduling a ribbon cutting at Golden Corral, which is just recently ready. That's 3 new businesses or 3 business expansions that the county has, and it's going to be great to keep that trend going, and that's the pressure we all have, is to make sure that trend keeps going, because we've got to pay for some things that we obviously just heard about that folks really, really want it. So we've got those. I understand from Major Mosier the other day that the sheriff got a grant from drug seizure for police cars, and you're going to get, is it 15?
9 police cars.
9 police cars. All right. So that's, I think they're still discussing the approval and paperwork. I just kind of jumped the gun, but that's in addition to the 7 or 8 they bought when the county gave them more money. So we should get a nice bump in the sheriff's police cars. The board's been FOIA'd for the Port Royal boundary adjustment and Moss Neck Plantation. I think we're all aware of that and sent some things in. The other thing is I talked to our lawyers the other day, and both sand and gravel operations in Port Royal have been resolved. They've been approved. Probably the net cost to the county was $100,000 in legal fees. So it's quite a bit there. The Korean War Veterans Memorial, I mean, we could talk for days and days about how great that was and how nicely some of our members clean up. Mr. Mosier, you know who I'm talking about, how nicely some of our members clean up? Yes, sir. They looked really good in that Marine uniform. But again, you know, congratulations to the History Club, Mrs. Gibson. There was about 200 or so people that showed up. It was a great event. I was never so proud of the county than at that point. We had young, old, those in between. It was a great thing. I mentioned the work Mr. Whiteman did there, and I mentioned the work Major Mosier did there. I didn't mention young Thomas Ball, who helped create the sign. And young Mr. Ball actually calls me Uncle Floyd, because his father and I used to play baseball together when we were about 15, so that was a long time ago. But it just shows how the next generation picks up things right away, and it was really just a great thing. Now, I do have a VACO report filed with my expense report, but a couple of things I wanted to mention. 911 changes are coming to all of us. You've seen the commercials with the smart cars that can predict the accidents. Well, those same cars that predict the accident are going to call 911. I don't know if we're ready to handle that. I don't think we are. I don't think too many people are. But that's a technology thing we have to look at. At VACO, broadband is still just important to rural localities. The folks in Spotsylvania didn't think it was that important to them because they've got access. So we need to work on that. And we're doing the big radio system. So having said all that, I think I'm going to ask Mrs. Hall to reactivate our technology committee that we were doing before, and probably without the vendors. Right now, we'll just do it locally, and we'll try to look at the use, the implementation, and expansion of technology throughout the county. And if there's a board member who'd like to join, please feel free. And last, that's why I was looking at it. And last, Mr. Taylor mentioned the passing of Judge Farmer. His viewing will be on Saturday at Stork Funeral Home, and the funeral is actually Sunday at Bowling Green Baptist. And that's it. So back to the agenda. Mr. Rogers, it's time for presentations and reports. And we'd asked you before for some preliminary information before the referendum came, and since it's passed, we're going to ask you for some preliminary information and direction of how to get it done.
Okay. And I will add, at VACO, I heard the same thing about broadband from a client of ours out in the western part of the state. So it is definitely, there's a number of you that are looking at it. So definitely banding together is going to help. And I think preliminary is the right word here, because obviously we haven't really had a chance, I haven't really had a chance to talk with staff to get any information from the schools to kind of see what's going on. So some of the information you're going to hear tonight is based on the article I read in the paper and just some light discussions I've had with members of staff. But what I'd like to do is, and I'll say also, I don't have a strong recommendation tonight as to which way to go. I think we need to get some more information from you all as well as others before we go there. But this will give you, I think, a good idea of the options you have, kind of ballpark where rates are at the moment and where they might be headed, and we can look at the impact on the budget. So we're going to talk about how to borrow the funds, interest rate outlook, when might be a good time to go borrow the funds, the length of borrowing in terms of how long the payback, and talk about projected debt service and the impact on the tax rate. On page 2, the post-referendum, as has already been stated, the referendum was 80.8% in favor, and that was $26.3 million for the renovations of Caroline High and Madison. Thought it might be interesting. There were 2 other referendums that I know took place on November 5th, just so you can kind of see the differential. Loudon, who basically has a referendum nearly every year for some type of projects, basically, and most of them being school. And this is the school question here. They had, I thought you might be interested in seeing the turnout. 44% of the active voters in Caroline showed up to vote. In Loudon, 45.4, and in Chesterfield, 49.6. Now, what's interesting, of course, is in Caroline, you didn't have anything else on the ballot. And I believe there were other questions in Loudon and Chesterfield. But you overwhelmingly had the most support, 80.8%, Loudon only about 68%, and Chesterfield at 72%. So just thought that might be of interest to you. Our understanding is that $21 million of the bond proceeds are needed for Caroline High and $4 million for Madison. So our job would be, once you direct us, would be to go out and borrow only $25 million for the project itself. The other $1.3 million was there in case we needed it for cost of issuance or for the sizing of the bond issue, depending upon how it's sold. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but by sizing, I think we've talked about this before. If the bond market required us to sell bonds at a price below par, then we need more bonds to make up the difference when we sell them. We sold bonds for Loudoun County yesterday, and they actually sold at a premium. So they actually were able to reduce the par that they have to pay back. It all comes out in the wash in terms of the way we price the bonds. The all-in interest cost is really what we're trying to get to the lowest point. And it all, depending upon how the bonds price, the interest rates all work out to be whatever the current market is. We just wanted to be sure, not knowing where the market might head, if buyers want to buy bonds at a discount, then we'd have to issue more than $25 million in order to produce $25 million of bond proceeds. If they're willing to pay us more than par, we may issue less than $25 million to produce $25 million of project costs. So don't be surprised if we come back and we only sold $23 million worth of bonds because we got $2.5 million worth of premium from the purchasers of the bonds. And usually what that means is we pay a little more on the coupon, but in the end our yield is lower. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is get the lowest yield or the lowest all-in cost. So happy to expand on that, and it'd probably be easier for me to show you some graphics, but I just wanted to mention that so there was no surprises down the road if somebody says, well, why did we issue 22 or 23 million? Loudon had 45.2 million was the size that we were needing to issue, and they had a $4 million premium. So net, they only needed 41 million to issue bonds. So we will only issue what we need to issue in order to produce 25 million is my point. And that's the way the numbers have been run up to this point. From the news articles, what I saw was that construction dollars are not going to be needed prior to June of 14 in terms of actually hard construction starting. Expected completion August 2015 for the elementary school and August 16 for the high school. And that's really all we know at this time. We don't know how quickly the dollars will be spent. We know the length of time, but usually it's a typical bell curve. You start out slow, you have the bulk of dollars in the middle, and then it tails off. But that could be different because we're doing renovations. So it might be helpful to know down the road how fast they're going to spend the money in terms of when we borrow it. But we'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. How to borrow the funds. There's really 3 different ways that we can go out and procure the funds. Bank placement, go through the Virginia Public School Authority's pool financing, or we could issue bonds in the name of Caroline County on its own, out in the public market. A bank placement is going to require no bond rating. It's going to have the most flexible redemption provisions, meaning to be able to, if we needed to refinance or restructure, they're typically callable at any time without penalty. We might need to go and do more than one issue. What I mean by that is the banks have a limitation on how much they can actually lend us at any one time. We We might find a bank that's willing to lend us the full $25 million. We might find a bank that says, I can only do 15, I can only do 10. So that's a limitation we might run into. So we might have to do 10 now and 15 later or something like that, or maybe we split it up between two different banks. We might not get a fixed rate for a full 20 years. In other words, with rates being still pretty low, we're not at the lowest point, but we're still pretty low, and we'll see that in a moment in a chart, they may not be willing to give us a rate that's fixed for the entire 20-year period that we'd like to issue the bonds, or, as we're going to talk about later, we could go 30, but I think our recommendation is going to be 20. What we've seen is some of the banks will give us a fixed rate for 10 years, but let us amortize it over a 20-year period. After the 10th year, we have to reset the rate. We've borrowed like that in the past. We actually have one issue that's got about 4 more years at the fixed rate, and then we're going to have to reset it. And that's something we're going to be talking about probably in the next year or so, about maybe wanting to go ahead and fix that for a longer period of time. And part of that might be when we go to the timing of when we do these bonds. The last bullet on bank placement is that the upfront issuance costs are low. We're not paying for bond ratings, we're not paying for printing, we're not paying for extra work it takes to pull a preliminary official statement together with information for the public buyers. If we go through the Virginia Public School Authority, their pool financing, we would basically be combined with other school projects from around the state in one of their 2 financings they do in a year. They issue 2 times a year. They just issued or just sold bonds for the fall, October, November time period. The next time they'll sell will be in the April, May time period. So we'd have to wait about 6 months. One of the limitations is that it's a limited ability to refinance. Basically, the county can't call up and say, we want to refinance our portion. Only they decide when they can refinance. So the control shifts to the authority themselves as to when they want to refinance. What that means to us is if we needed to restructure for some reason, we really can't. Our hands are pretty much tied. There's an annual fee charged for use of the pool. Right now it's an extra 5 basis points on whatever the market rate is. And the issuance costs are low up front because you're sharing that with the other participants in the pool, and it varies depending upon how many folks are in the pool. In terms of paying their lawyers to prepare the official statement and the rating fees, all of that's shared by the pool participants. One of the benefits is you're going to be using their rating, which is a AA1, AA+. That's 1 notch off the state's AAA, and we'll talk about how that might affect us. So we'd be basically borrowing off the state's bond rating, if you would. Lastly, would be issuing bonds on our own. One of the benefits is that the decision to refinance is up to the county. Generally, they're callable in 9 or 10 years when we go out and do a public call, as opposed, of course, to the bank placement, as I mentioned earlier, which could be called at any time. It's going to require the county to go out and actually get a bond rating. We've talked about this in the past. We don't have a bond rating currently. That's something we would have to go out and procure. And there's higher cost of issuance, and mainly that's due to rating fees. As I said earlier, there's more time involved putting together a public document that actually would be used to go out and sell the bonds, called an official statement. Continuing on page 4, just to kind of set some of the other differences between the 3. As I mentioned early on, size in terms of the bank placement, that could be limited. There's no limit under the other 2 options, whether it be the VPSA or the county's own public sale. As I mentioned, there's no rating on the bank placement. I just mentioned the pool rating is a AA1, AA+, just off the AAA. I'm going off an estimate here. My estimate right now would be that if we went out and got a bond rating today, we'd be in, I think, the A range, maybe an A- or an A, something like that. So based off of that, in the next row there, we've estimated the spread over current municipal bond index. Every day there's a company called Municipal Market Data, which is short, MMD for short, that is produced. That they basically look at bonds that are sold out in the market, and they produce a scale. And what I mean by that is a rate from year 1 to year 30, and what they think a AAA rated GO, like a Loudoun County, would sell in the market on that, what they would have sold on that given day. And that's something that traders use to buy and sell bonds. What they do is they look at the AAA and they say, okay, if you're a AA1 like VPSA, you're going to trade so many basis points higher than the best rate, which is a AAA GO. So talking to my desk, they said in the early years, roughly the first 10 years, a VPSA bond is going to be 10 to 15 basis points higher than a AAA GO. And in later years, it's going to be about 30 basis points, or 1/3 of 1% higher. And then, of course, we've got the 5 basis point fee we'd add on. To compare, an A-rated or an A-minus rated county GO bond is going to be 25 to 30 basis points off that MMD, or roughly 15 basis points higher than the VPSA. And then in the later years, it could be as high as 45 basis points higher. So the spread widens as you go out a little bit further on the yield curve. What we did is we put that in our model and we ran it. And based off the bank rates are basically whatever the bank thinks the bond is worth. So there's no index for that. But based on what we've seen in terms of bids we've received for other clients in the past few weeks, we think a bank placement might be in the 3.7 to 4.2 range. A VPSA sale today would be about 360, and a county GO public sale would be about 4% based off those spreads. So if we went out on our own, we think it would be about 40 to 45 basis points higher than a VPSA, and a bank placement could be anywhere on either side of that. So there's some options, I guess is probably the best way to say it at this point. Now, one of the things I'll point out is that, as you might recall, I mentioned the VPSA sale won't take place again until April or May. A lot of things can happen in the next 6 months. Rates could go up 30 basis points. They could go up 100 basis points. They could also come down 30 basis points or 100 basis points. So who knows?
But Mr. Rogers, on that note, we only have this, if the school construction is supposed to be started June 2014, if we put all our eggs in the VPSA basket, there's no real guarantee we would be approved, right?
Approved by VPSA?
Yeah.
You don't have to be approved by VPSA.
So we're automatically...
You're automatic. I mean, you've got a GO referendum. You just put the application in and you're in process. There is no credit approval by the state, not like VRA.
Okay.
It just occurred to me, you're thinking of, VRA has a credit approval process.
Right.
That is correct.
Okay, so...
But through the state, there is no credit approval process, through Virginia Public School Authority.
VPSA is automatic
Yes,
that we're going to get the money. So
Yes,
if we file in
I think their
March or
application is
whenever-
probably in late February or early March, is my guess.
So we'll definitely get the money May.
Probably
and then
early
be ready
May.
for June.
It would definitely be in time for June.
Okay. Bank placement, can we, I mean, I'd feel bad if I was the banker and you came to me and said, I want to borrow $25 million. And then you said, oh, never mind, I'm going to get this money from VPSA. So it's not wise to play both ends, is it?
Actually, your thought's not too far from a suggestion I was going to make toward the end.
Maybe it is wise to play both ends then.
Well, one of the thoughts is, you know, if you wanted to hedge our bets, meaning not play the market and wait and see if rates go up, is maybe we take and bid out a portion of this and go ahead and lock it in with a bank, or all of it if we wanted to. We can send an RFP out. We can get back bids. We can come back to you and say, here's what we have, and then you can decide whether to take it or not.
Okay, and we could do all of that before
the application's even
the
due.
February deadline for the application.
Right. And that's why I say, in timing-wise, we'd want to talk to staff and work with you guys. But
Courtney, what's the cost of going out to bid like that?
for doing it through the banks,
Right.
the way we've done it is there's no cost unless we need to close. Because
Okay.
essentially the fees are basically paying us and paying your bond counsel. That's it. Sometimes the banks will add a fee to it, but if you decide not to move forward, then we're not going to send you a bill.
Okay.
So there's no cost obligation.
So we really want to think about what's going to be the easiest way to procure the funding and, of course, the most economical.
But again, we may get bids in that don't give us a rate that's fixed for the full 20 years.
Right.
But we might. I mean, if we were doing a lease, I can tell you that we haven't seen a 20-year locked-in rate for a lease. But GOs, it's a better credit because it's full faith and credit, and the
Yeah.
banks really like that. And
Yeah.
so we have seen a few bids come lately that locked in that rate for the full 20 years.
All right. Now, this may be part of your presentation, but VPSA has a 20-year limit?
They don't have a 20-year limit In fact, I know they just sold bonds. I saw they had like 23 years or something like that. So we can go out longer.
Okay, because I think we did the middle school at 30, because that's just coming off, or it's 25?
I think we may have ended up at 25.
Yeah, okay.
But it was longer. Let me go, because I want to
All right.
talk about that. That's
Okay.
definitely a point I want to make here in a moment. I will say that the Virginia Public School Authority is not as flexible in the early years in being able to structure principal. They haven't been. Let me say they haven't been in the past. Full disclosure, I think I may have mentioned this to you all before. Our firm was selected back in July. We are now the FA to VPSA. I don't do the work. Some of my other partners do it. They may be more amenable to actually helping us structure around our existing debt from a cash flow perspective.
Right.
So we may slow the principal in the early years so that we don't, have real spikes in our debt service. In the past, their old FA wasn't as nice about helping us try to do that, no matter who our client was. So there may be we may be able to work better with our staff than in the past.
Good point.
But in the past, they haven't been very flexible. I think I basically mentioned the other points in the earlier page. Let's flip over to page 5, just talking about interest rates for a moment. This is a graph of the 10-year MMD. Again, that's a tax-exempt rate, and the 20-year MMD. What it tells you is that you can see how rates really bottomed out in 2012, 2013. We really hit the low point in November of a year ago, 2012, and it came up. And then, of course, the summer after Bernanke spoke in early or late May, we saw rates jump up about 120 basis points in the municipal market. So very quickly, as soon as there was discussion that the Fed was going to start tightening back up, things jumped up very quickly. Now you can see they've come back down, but not back to those levels. But in the grand scheme of things, rates are still pretty good. The all-in rate for Loudon selling 20-year level principal, which we're going to level payments. Level principal is more front-loaded. That's just the way they have always paid their debt. Was like a 320. So pretty good rate there. And then there's some more statistics in terms of the averages. But the real point I wanted to make there is that rates are still pretty good, but there has been some upward pressure on those rates. We talked a little bit about when to borrow the funds. A bank placement is going to take basically about 30 days, and we can do that anytime the board chooses to move forward with that at this point, anytime. Now, normally, I think if you were bidding a project out and you didn't know exactly how much you wanted to borrow, you might wait until the bids come in. But it sounds like the decision's been made to, we're going to give the schools this amount of money no matter what. And if that is the way we want to do it, and then we can go borrow the money anytime.
Well, the referendum specifically says 21 for the high school, 4 for Madison.
Okay.
So we can't just give them 25 million and say, go for it. They have to, I would imagine the county attorney's going to say they have to spend 21 million in one school and then 4 in the other. So
If the question, I don't want to mean to speak for you, but you correct me if I'm wrong. The question says 21 million for the high school and 4 million for Madison, and let's say the bids came in at 3.5 million for Madison. They can't take that $500,000 extra and put it at the high school. I just don't remember how the question was worded, but that's my understanding of Virginia law. Yeah.
okay. Well, we'll make sure we clarify that, but I thought that's what they were telling us.
It depends on the way it's worded.
That's what the school told us.
Okay, yeah, and it depends on legally the way it was set up with the courts and put it on the ballot, and I'm sorry, I looked for it and I couldn't find the question before the presentation. I was actually looking for it.
Yeah, I think that's what the school board specifically told us, because we took their resolution.
And that's why I say we need to, that may be part of the decision of timing, may be, do we need to wait on any bids to come in? Could be that we borrow 80% of the money now and maybe you borrow 20% as later on. There's a couple of different ways we can.
So we need in the next month or so to make sure we meet with the school board to figure out what their plans are.
The other thing is, I think we just need to be mindful of the interest rate. I think, looking at the trend, we need to borrow it at the lowest rate we can.
That's right.
And based on the discussion we had with the school board, and I think, Ben, it was 21 and 4.
Right.
Because when we met with the school board to make sure that was correct.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure that's that's the language, because I remember the superintendent saying they were still working on getting the 20 million to be just 21 million.
They don't, right, they have estimates.
Right.
And our position was 21 is what you said you needed. If the estimate's below that, great. If it's above it, you have to cut some things out. I think that was the discussion that we had board to board, and that's what they agreed to. You make a great point, is our interest rate's going to go up. If I was a gambler, I'd take that bet because they're going to go up. But if I borrow the money tomorrow, I'm basically sitting on the money for 6 months before I use it, so I'm making 6 months of interest payments for nothing.
You're going to have a little bit of negative carry because
Right.
you're going to be earning 0.3 maybe at best.
Oh, are you kidding? 0.1?
But I think the state SNAP, the state non-overcharge program, is about 0.25, 0.3. But
Okay.
you're thinking of overnights. But yes, it's not much. No argument there.
If the rate were to go up 0.5%,
Right.
we'd be on the backside of that going, wish we'd borrowed it.
That's right. Yeah, I never. Yeah.
Well, that's one
You want to
thing.
worry about the 20-year rate, not the 6-month loss.
Right.
But we want to know right now, like tomorrow, if we borrow money, the 26 million tomorrow, how much would we pay before they actually start construction? And then if that's $200,000-$300,000, my risk of waiting until the interest rate hits X, then I spend $300,000 more. Because we're all going to number crunch this sucker to death.
I can tell you, just because I've done this analysis before,
I would imagine so.
whatever the dollar amount is over the next 6 months, you may end up paying a couple $100,000, but it's going to be probably 3 or 4 or 5-fold larger if rates jump up on you that you're going to pay over that 20 years.
So without saying so, you're giving us the recommendation that we need to borrow the money
If you
as soon as
feel like the
possible.
rates are going to go up, then we need to move
Okay,
now.
okay. We were going to wait till the end to make a recommendation, but I think you're leading us to
Kinda
that
where we're
already.
heading,
But
sure.
You go right ahead.
So that goes back to the when to borrow, and just kind of giving you timelines again. As I mentioned, the next sale for VPSA is not until April, May. We could do a county public sale. Now that's going to take a little bit longer because again, we're having to pull together information for both the bond rating as well as an official statement, a public offering document. So that's a 60 to 90 day process. And what I will say is where we sit right now in terms of we're at November, we're probably not, it's probably the first of the year before we ever get to a point where you're ready to approve any type of sale in terms of actually closing on any sale. You're not going to have any debt service payments until fiscal 15. So nothing would have to come out of the 14 budget in terms of debt service. Does that make sense?
Oh, I heard that.
Perfect. Okay.
Nothing in the debt service for next year's budget.
For this year's
For
budget.
this year's budget.
This year. So it would be something you take up in the spring or after January.
So we don't have to include that anyhow. We kind of knew that. Okay.
All right, length of borrowing. I've mentioned a couple of different times that you do have the flexibility to choose, pay it off over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. Most localities pay school construction projects out over a 20-year time period, especially in the case of renovations and repairs. That way your debt service funds or debt service monies that you have in your budget are basically ready in year, say, 21 for the next wave of projects or renovations or repairs that need to be done. And of course, prudent financial practices, you repay the principal over a period no more than the useful life of the project. So we don't want to borrow for a 10-year life and over 20 years, obviously. The rate agencies like to see local governments repaying at least 55 to 60% of their overall principal outstanding within a 10-year time period. And what I mean by that is, if we've got $10 million of debt outstanding and we're paying $5 million of it over 10 years, then we paid 50% off in the first 10 years. So what they like to see is you pay it off a little bit faster than that. So when we did the elementary school over a longer period of time, you obviously it makes it more difficult to hit that 50 to 60%. Our payout ratio right now is at 53%, and that's because we haven't issued large amounts of debt. While we've issued some debt, it hasn't been huge amounts of debt, and we haven't gone out too long. We've gone, remember, with the radio system, we went shorter. So that's helped actually bring our payout ratio down. So the further out past 20 years you go, it does make it more of a challenge to keep that number above 50%. especially when we add a large amount of debt. Give you a for instance, I was in Lynchburg earlier today. They've got $120 million of debt outstanding. They're facing a $80 million high school that they're about to drop on their debt next spring. So we're going to lump on about $80 million onto 120. That their payout ratio is going to go from like 69% all the way down to about 35%, I believe. Their policy is that at the end of their 5-year CIP, that it be at 60%, because that is the large kahuna in the room. There's no other, they don't have any other major projects. They will get there. They're going to be at 63% at the end of their 5-year CIP. So that's something we want to keep an eye on, too, especially if we're thinking of talking to the rating agencies and getting a bond rating.
And we're in a similar position,
So,
although we're not dropping $80 million.
No, but we did with the radio system, Mr. Chairman, did pay that upfront costs and then did opt for the 12 and a half years. I mean, it's in the minutes that we
Right.
just approved, which I think, again, probably helps us in the long run with this because the percentage of debt being paid early on is high.
that definitely helped. Absolutely. So just some things to think about. On page 8, the projected debt service, got two different rates to show you. One is at 4%, which, as you remember, that's sort of the number we were at 4.06. So it's roughly what we were saying today's rate would be if you went out on your own and did your own bond issue with your own rating. This is, you can see level payments over 20 years. It's about $1.9 million. All in, the TIC was, once we added the cost of issuance, was a 434. And then we did one assuming rates went up 150 basis points, or 1.5%. And that's a pretty good jump, but just to show you the differential, at 5.5%, when you add on the cost of issuance, it was a 587 rate. And you can see it's about, it goes from 38 million total debt service to 43 million, so about a $5 million differential for that 150 basis point bump up. And using 250,000, I know I didn't have the exact number with me when I was putting this together, but using 250 as a rough estimate of your penny, it's 8.6 cents at 5.5%, and at 4% roughly 7.6. So about a 1 penny difference depending upon where interest rates are. So that goes back to the whole waiting and rates jump up can obviously put pressure on the tax rate. Now this, of course, is not taking into account your existing debt. As I recall, I think our existing debt actually goes up a little bit over the next couple of years, so we haven't factored it all in yet. So there's still, you do have some other wood to chop on the debt service on existing debt. So final thoughts. We've talked about this already. Interest rates are more likely to rise substantially than they are to fall substantially. So there's a better chance that rates jump up a lot. There's always a chance that rates do fall, but I don't see them going substantially down. And there's a chance that rates stay where they are. Right now, the economy's not getting any better. While Friday unemployment numbers came out and looked a lot rosier than the market anticipated, it immediately said, oh, the Fed's going to come back and change their mind. And so rates went up like 15 basis points on the 10-year Treasury in a day. We saw this summer, we saw municipal bond rates go up 40 basis points in 2 days. A lot of that had to do with supply and demand and people running away from bond funds, taking their money out and putting it in the stock market. And so that caused a supply-demand issue. But those are the type of things we could see if the market and the economy continues to get a little bit better. As I mentioned, we could choose to borrow a portion of the bonds now and a portion later. If we wanted to go ahead and say, as I mentioned earlier, maybe you pick a number, 80% of it now or 70% of it now and borrow the balance later, once we have a better idea of the project costs. And again, that's why we need to have a little bit more discussion as to of timing of projects, when bids are going to come in, whether we're going to give them the absolute number or we're going to give them what they need to finish the project.
Okay, well, were you finished, Mr. Rogers?
That's pretty much it. I think we've kind of talked about the other points. So. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much for, as always, a very thorough report. I think we need to kind of discuss it so we can give you a little direction as to the best way to proceed. Seems like it's a good idea to borrow the money now, or at least a portion, and maybe that's what we should talk about, because we don't we don't know much more than you know reading the paper, but they're gonna plan to finish Madison in a year and the high school in 2